There's a lot of information on the back, and I encourage you to take a look at it. And there's also a great deal of information on the TRAA.blog website, which has many, many good articles as well as videos, and I encourage you to go look at that as well as the website. Today we want to give you new information. I just want to quickly, if some people have questions, if they've come with questions, just kind of call them out. Somebody have a question they'd like answered today? Everybody knows. We actually have a song, everybody knows. Okay, so we'll try to keep it moving along. And so we've been fighting this thing a long time, right? Thousands of us have signed petitions, hundreds have marched, many elected officials have taken a stand. We've got a couple representatives of them here today. And to the shame, though, some have assisted the two refineries to perpetuate a fraud on the community, risking the lives of tens of thousands, as well as thousands of jobs and the whole economy of the Los Angeles metropolitan area. When you look back and reflect, it's amazing how a relatively small number of active people were able to wrestle these gigantic companies to a draw. And that is until September 6th. And we're going to talk about that. But both locally and nationally, veterans in the struggle for the environmental safety have praised how successful our efforts have been. And we hear later from some of that. So if everyone is engaged in an action, a meeting, and a petition, circling data, if you've done that, or stood up at a meeting, or been someplace, or told a friend, done something to fight hydrofluoric acid, could you please rise? And give ourselves a round of applause. Yet, we still have to face the fact that 1.6 miles from us right now, there is 250,000 pounds of hydrofluoric acid and an additional 500,000 pounds in Valero that sits only 5,247 feet from Wilmington Park Elementary School and 4,300 feet from the ILWU dispatch hall. So 4 years ago, the AQMD started to work on adopting a rule at our demands, at our urging, at our agitation. So on September 6th, a very bad decision was made by them. It began with a devastating report on February 1st by AQMD staff, where it became clear the refineries were losing the argument on many fronts. That presentation by Phil Fine showed that there's no difference between HF and MHF. There's no way to mitigate it, and there are safer alternatives. So the refineries began an aggressive campaign in collaboration with the leadership of the building trades, acting contrary to their own membership, to change the character of the board from 9 members who favored continuing the fact-based process of regulation to a vote of 8-3 to allow the continued use of HF in the refinery. But what has happened in the last 5 months has shown that that was a really bad decision. But what was the response of the ban HF movement? Well, I have to say for myself, it was like a Mike Tyson punch in the gut. It was like a whack in the head. Many people were really disheartened by it. Some gave up. Some people became active. We were unsure, frankly, what to do next. But in an October meeting of TRAA on Monday night at Sizzler, where we meet regularly, we welcome you to come, we brainstormed the next steps. One proposal was to close the organization down. That got 0 votes. Today we hear about an idea that was adopted, a campaign to pressure the governor and the attorney general to act. We had meetings with representatives of Supervisor Hahn, Public Health Department, Coalition for Clean Air, where there was representatives each told us that the battle can be won, that we need to continue the fight, and your presence today indicates that you agree with these seasoned veterans. A lot of positive events have happened since the September 6th fiasco, and we're going to highlight a few of them. Number one is a lot of evidence has come forward in various reports, and we're going to mention some of them, but for more detail, again, go to the blog. On January 13th, EPA announced a settlement on violations at the refinery in Torrance related to HF. The headlines in the Daily Breeze, and we thank them for their excellent coverage. And again today, they have a story. Be sure to get it about today's event. Headline, highly toxic chemical targeted. Okay, it has some mixed parts of it, but that's all right. So the focus of the EPA article in the Times was on the low fines for things like the mitigation mechanisms being broken for weeks. But underneath that lead, we have discovered two major areas of increased concern. First, the area of the death zone, as shown on these maps, in a worst-case scenario required by a risk management plan by the EPA, vastly underestimated by the refineries. They are now required to double the circle from 3 to 6 miles, putting more millions at risk officially, and we believe the actual risk area is 16 miles. Secondly, attention has also been paid to the storage areas of the refineries, and these are huge amounts, even more than in the settler tanks, and there's no mitigation that's been done that we know of to those storage areas and the pipes leading from the storage to the settler tanks, which are where the stuff happens. I'm not a scientist, you know. So so now we're so that's a new thing that the EPA is talking about that, and Congressman Ted Lieu will be submitting a letter requesting all EPA documents related to this settlement, and the documents we need were spelled out by our speaker at the end, Daniel Horowitz, so you'll meet him by video. And the second thing is that mitigation works. So in October, the U.S. Chemical Safety, there was an explosion, right, in Philadelphia, a huge explosion. They released a report on that, and Torrance Refinery representative had back in June told Supervisor Hahn in an open meeting that there was no release of HF and that all mitigation work just worked fine in Philadelphia. Dr. Ging is going to come up and give you a brief highlight on the revelations in that CSB report.
Thank you very much, Steve. I brought some pictures here to help, and a copy of this is in the back. Torque and Valero brought hundreds of workers to proffer that they feel safe until they don't, as witnessed by one worker at PES. MHF is supposed to prevent a ground-hugging HF cloud from forming. It doesn't. And here, it actually showed that the HF release cloud exceeded 40% of the Koopman test, and 25% more was captured by the water curtain. So the water curtain is not that effective. PES also exploded out 76,000 pounds of tank debris, flew 800 to 2,100 feet. The big chunk was bigger than a bus. It flew across the river. I did a calculation, and I calculated it came crashing down. This is a bus from the air at over 177 miles an hour. The other chunks were over 100 miles an hour each. The Chemical Safety Board looks at root cause. They found that an elbow joint had worn down to half the thickness of a credit card. Never inspected because it was hard to get to. Only an MHF ban can prevent worse things from happening here. Thank you.
And the third lie, that there's no safer alternatives, we were referred to a company that is deploying in large, vast quantities in many refineries in China and have had business interest requests from Canada, Spain, elsewhere. And this is a non-corrosive chemical that is proven in the sense that it's operating, producing millions of gallons of high-octane gasoline around the world, and which they are ready to announce the opening of a retrofit version, which is using the same pipes, but putting in HF, instead of HF, putting this other alkylation in. And of course, as fate would have it, where is that refinery in China? Wuhan. So they're busy on other things at the moment, but very shortly there will be a press release and you all will get a copy of it. And of course Valero has built one for $416 million in Louisiana, and Salt Lake City Chevron is about to open as well. So following our explosion, the CSB, and then the battle for more information continues. After our explosion, the CSB collected a lot of information, but refineries refused to, particularly ExxonMobil, to give them. They went into court, fought it, and lost in district court, and now have won on December 14th in the Ninth Circuit Court. So stay tuned for that. So we've been doing a lot of things as well. I mean, there's been lots of articles, lots of press. I don't know if you guys have been seeing it, but if you sign up, you'll get notices of these things as they come out around the country and around the world. What we've been doing since is the TRAA members have been raising this at numerous community meetings, planning meetings, environmental, the Public Health Department, AQMD, Democratic Party Convention, candidates forums, etc., resulting in getting the removal, one success is the removal of HF to be one of the 4 strategic priorities of the County Health Improvement Plan. There's been Freedom of Information Act in cooperation with PEER, a legal group nationally, and the California Coalition for Clean Air and Public Health have also been building a partnership with us. We keep informing people with our regular newsletters. We continue to survive and thrive. So in conclusion, we've learned that the HF is even more dangerous than we thought. It cannot be mitigated to protect, and there are safer alternatives. TRA is here to stay. MHF has got to go. Thank you. On a very granular level to our schools and school children.
Are our schools prepared for a toxic chemical release? The Torrance and Valero Wilmington refineries use a large amount of toxic chemical called modified hydrofluoric acid. When MHF is released, it creates a ground-hugging toxic cloud that can drift for miles. This nearly happened February 18th, 2015, when the Torrance Refinery exploded.
A flammable hydrocarbon mixture was flowing through the air side of the FCC unit and moving toward the ESP with its multiple ignition sources. There, the flammable hydrocarbon mixture violently exploded.
4 workers were injured, but at the time, ExxonMobil told residents there was no health danger to the community. But CBS News has learned it could have been much worse.
We were really, really lucky.
Vanessa Sutherland, the recently appointed head of the Chemical Safety Board, the federal agency charged with investigating the accident, calls it a near miss.
I think it is of concern to us that we have a facility that had a near miss, which I actually feel very lucky about. It could have been much more catastrophic.
This picture tells it all. Look at this.
Catastrophic, she says, because when the explosion happened, a piece of equipment weighing 80,000 pounds was sent flying nearly 100 feet. Sources say this photo, submitted to federal investigators and obtained by CBS News, shows that piece landed just a few feet from a tank containing a form of hydrofluoric acid. It's a highly toxic chemical that, if released, can form a cloud of toxic gas that can drift for miles, potentially causing thousands of injuries and even deaths.
HF, in our view and in my view, is one of the most hazardous and deadly chemicals. In worst case scenarios at deadly levels, it causes asphyxiation because once inhaled, it causes respiratory problems that build up fluid and you ultimately drown.
Edison Elementary is a few blocks from the refinery, and my room is right next to the playground. So it was determined that if we had to shelter in place and the students were at recess or lunch, all 200 5 to 7-year-olds would be ushered into my classroom. So the thought of getting all those children into my classroom before a cloud of MHF strikes is daunting. But that is only the first step, because then I have to prevent the gas from entering the classroom. So the plan calls for duct tape. all around the doors, the windows, and the vents. Now, classrooms don't have ladders, and my ceiling is tall. The before Edison is about 4 blocks away with the average wind speed in Torrance. I calculated it's about 4 to 7 minutes before the cloud would reach me. Now, in the news, we've seen teachers act heroically in the face of gun violence over and over again. But a teacher can't save a life by tackling an MHS cloud. And all these plans for duct tape will not keep our children safe.
Okay, so very impactful, I think. Videos like this are available on the TRAA blog. I think there's 7 or 8 of them. And we have a couple of stars from the video. Could they stand up? All right. Okay, so now we are ready to go to the press conference. Jane Alfonso, one of our star members, is going to give us the background on that, and then briefly after that there will be question and answer. If there's any people from the press who want to ask a question, that'll be your chance.